Chapter 131, Exchange 2. So you want to send some of our best talents to the containment department. Carmen Johannesburg, the section chief of the Horde department, raised his brow as he looked at the guild master. He was really struggling to understand what the guild master's intentions were with this. And that made him extremely cautious. While Carmen was the section chief of one of the most powerful departments within the entire guild, he was still extremely cautious of the friendly-looking man before him. He, of all people, knew the true nature of the guild master. Though he wore a friendly smile, it was nothing more than a carefully maintained facade. No guild rose to such prominence without making sacrifices and staining their hands in the process. Behind the clean and friendly smile were hands that were filled with nothing but blood. Yes, that's correct, the guild master continued with that friendly smile of his. That's all you'll have to do. Just send a few of your best talents. Pick whoever you want, and we'll have them interact with those of the containment department. Have them perform there to see if it's truly as easy as you think it is. The room fell silent once again, all eyes focused on the smiling guild master. You don't have to send all your talents at once. We can have it happen by department, or each of you can just send 1 or 2 talents each. It doesn't particularly matter, right? The guild master asked, turning his attention towards the haggard-looking section chief of the containment department. Yeah, sure, it doesn't really matter. Carmen frowned as he watched the man's nonchalant expression and the ease with which he addressed the guild master, doing his best to mask the flicker of displeasure tightening his features. Annoying bastard. While Carmen did believe that the containment department of their guild was the least useful of all their departments, providing the least profits and results, the main reason for such thoughts was the lazy-looking figure beside the guild master. He couldn't understand it. What did the guild master see in him to treat him so well? None of the other section chiefs even dared to think of treating the guild master the way that he did, so nonchalantly and so unprofessionally. Not only that, but he also hardly brought any results. How could any of the section chiefs like him? He was a cancer to them, a cancer that threatened to topple the entire guild over if not handled correctly. So, I have yet to receive an answer. What do you think? Hearing the guildmaster's voice again, Carmen turned towards the other section chiefs. They all appeared to have their own thoughts on the matter, but in the end, they all turned to the guildmaster and nodded. I'll let Christian know. He'll go down to the containment department when this starts. I'm on board as well. Same. In the end, the only one that was left was Carmen, who remained silent as he watched the others agree. Feeling everyone's gaze, Carmen eventually relented as well. I'll do so as well. Go. But Carmen cut off the guild master before he could start speaking as he looked straight at him in the eye. Although he feared and respected the guild master, there were certain things that had to be done. If our talents can excel in the containment department, I wish for you to allocate the budget towards our departments. If even people who aren't trained to handle such gates can clear it, I don't see how we should waste money on their department. His words were met with a bout of silence as everyone looked at him in surprise. But then, that's a good idea. Yes, I agree with this. I also think this is a great idea. With all of the section chiefs keen on the idea, the guild master could only smile. All right, as you wish. He waved his hand lightly. I'll agree on your terms. If you can truly prove to me that the containment department doesn't deserve the budget increase, I'll listen to you. I'll reward them with something else if that's truly the case. Understood. Carmen lowered his head, a thin smile forming on his lips. That moment marked the start of the agreement. News of the exchange rapidly spread throughout the guild. There was not one single person who didn't hear or talk about it. This was especially massive for those within the containment department. Although it wasn't for the greatest of reasons. Nurse fuck. With both her feet on her desk, Zoe groaned. With her phone dangling down her hand, her head rolled around the back of her seat as her eyes settled over to Kyle, who was sitting next to her table, alongside a couple of other figures. Of those, she managed to recognize Rowan talking to a couple of first years, who included Miles, alongside Terrence and a few others she couldn't quite recognize. Say something. Zoe poked Kyle's thigh with her phone. Do you not care at all about the fact that they're sending those bastards over? HM. Looking at her, Kyle cocked his head. Why should I care? That. Zoe didn't even know what to say, but then thinking about it, Kyle didn't really care to socialize with the people of the other departments. It was probably why he wasn't aware of how annoying they were. Not only were those bastards arrogant, but they really thought their department was much harder than theirs. Just thinking about the last interaction she had with them, Zoe's head throbbed. Oh, Seth. It was Kyle's words that brought her out of her thoughts. Seth, did he say Seth? Her head snapped up at once, catching sight of a familiar figure approaching in the distance. His posture was slightly hunched, and his face looked unusually pale. Most striking of all were the dark circles under his eyes, stark against his skin as he turned toward them, clutching what looked like a cup of coffee. Oh, even the way he sounded felt dead. What sort of? Kyle was the first to approach him, his expression somewhat concerned. Are you okay? You look. It's nothing. Seth replied, his voice slightly hoarse. I'm fine. He didn't look fine at all, Zoe thought. In fact, he looked like a walking zombie. Just a lot of work. Turning his head slightly, his eyes paused on Rowan and his face flinched. This didn't escape Zoe's sight as she looked at Rowan, who sat upright, his entire presence radiating respect. Did she miss something? No, he did act strangely before, but it wasn't this strange. Zoe squinted her eyes, feeling something amiss. Nevertheless, she quickly dismissed the thought as she adjusted her seating and pretended to do some work while secretly trying to peek in on the conversation between Seth and Kyle. But, looking to her right, she also realized she wasn't the only one, with several others peeking at their conversation. The fuck? So what have you been up to lately? I hardly see you these days. Well, like I said, a lot of work. Work, you have a lot of patience. It's not really. Then, I'm developing a new GAM. Clank. The conversation was suddenly interrupted by the sound of something falling. Slowly, everyone's attention turned towards Terence, whose face twitched. He then forced a smile as he picked up his laptop and sat down, covering his face with both hands as he saw the massive crack spread on the screen. Zoe felt a little bit of pity for him, but not that much. He made plenty of money. Either way, looking at the others, it felt as though everyone was acting somewhat weirdly. She couldn't quite put it into words, but it felt like everyone was somehow paying a lot of attention to Seth. It almost felt like he had his own secret fan club. No, there's no way. Zoe tried to dismiss the thought, but her face sank when she saw the others looking at her weirdly. What? HM? Zoe's thoughts were suddenly interrupted by a commotion. Turning her head, her face quickly sank, alongside that of a few others, as several figures appeared in the distance. They're here. She heard someone mumble, and her lips pursed. Indeed, they were. Those from the other departments. The moment they appeared, the surroundings quieted down. All eyes turned in their direction, drawn to the group of figures appearing at the department entrance. Their presence carried a strange magnetism, pulling everyone's focus the moment they stepped in. Ahead of them was the section chief, as he eventually came to a pause as he awkwardly scratched the side of his cheek. Feeling all the eyes directed his way, he proceeded to clap his hands once. May I have everyone's attention? His actions brought no change. He already had everyone's attention. Kadam. Clearing his throat, he glanced behind him at the group of 10 individuals. While all were dressed in regulation guild uniforms, 5 stood out immediately, their appearance. Their poise and their presence were simply different. I'm sure most of you are already familiar with the people in this room, so I'll skip the introductions. These over here will be the exchange members for the upcoming weeks. Since the news has already spread everywhere, I'm sure you're all well aware of the current situation. There's really no need for me to explain why they're here either. Hearing the section chief speak, black lines formed on the foreheads of a few people. In particular, Zoe and Kyle looked at each other. This bastard. It wasn't that he didn't need to introduce them or the situation, he just couldn't be bothered to do it. Kyle, Zoe, there you are. Hearing their names being called, the black lines on the two grew more pronounced. The section chief gave a greasy smile. Perfect timing. Why don't you two get them acquainted with the department? I've got a few things to take care of, thanks in advance. Neither of the two even got the chance to reply before the section chief turned around and left. By now, Zoe's forehead was covered in black lines. The same was for Kyle, who took a couple of deep breaths, mumbling things like, "Relax, I've handled worse. Seth is even more troublesome than this." From beside him, Seth tilted his head slightly. Did Kyle not know he was still here? "It's nice to meet you all again." Kyle's mumbling came to an abrupt halt as the group began to approach. Each wore a different expression, from smiles to frowns to indifference. But what made them stand out the most was their uniforms, clearly marked with the insignias and colors of their respective departments. Zoe's gaze immediately locked onto the tall figure of Kalen Jacobs, jet black hair, half-lidded eyes, and a pristine white uniform that clung a little too perfectly to his well-built frame. He looked every bit the charming heir to some powerful family. But that was the furthest thing from what he was. He was the guild's golden boy, star recruit of the hoarding department. Kalen Jacobs, the name was most frequently dropped when one talked about the guild's most promising talents. Raising his hand in a handshake motion, he glanced between Kyle and Zoe. "I haven't seen you much, but I've seen you quite a fair bit." He was obviously referring to the fact that Kyle didn't usually attend social gatherings like she did. But more than that, it's a shame, really. With your looks and skill, you could have soared up the ranks anywhere. It's still not too late to transfer, you know. What do you say? He smiled, full of empty charm, as if he genuinely pitied her. Pity that Zoe didn't need. Indeed, right before joining the guild, she had been recruited by all the other departments due to the talent that she displayed. But in the end, she still ended up choosing the containment department. This was all because of her goal. To her, nothing else mattered. Fame's money. It was all irrelevant to her. "I'm happy where I'm at, thanked you for the offer, though." Her answer came with a polite smile, masking her distaste. Although she disliked the man, she still had to keep up appearances. She even went as far as to shake his hand as Kyle followed right after. Thankfully, not everyone was annoying. "I guess you really haven't changed that much, huh?" Leaning back casually against a cubicle wall was a woman with waist-length white hair and crystal blue eyes. Her spear rested beside her, her expression a mix between indifference and annoyance. Seralith Nera, where Kalen was the poster child of hoarding, Seralith was the pride of the adventuring department. With her striking appearance, amazing talent with the spear, she stood out quite a lot. The only thing that set the difference between the two of them apart was their departments. If not for hoarding's greater popularity, she might have eclipsed Kalen entirely. "Haven't changed much." Kalen turned to look at Seralith and cocked his head. "Why would I change?" "Because you're still a pain in the ass." "Is that so?" Kalen chuckled like he hadn't just been insulted. "This is the first time I'm hearing this." Seralith rolled her eyes, drawing a chuckle from another girl nearby. Zoe turned to spot the source. With shoulder-length hair, a small mole just below her chin and a curvy figure, she was hard not to recognize. Especially when she had a badge dangling down her neck that said, Sarah Sorloth, Collection Department. Responsible for retrieving fragments from the gates, the role of the collection department was essential to the guild. "What's so funny?" Seeing Sarah laugh, Seralith frowned, only to be ignored by Sarah as she shook her head and looked around the department. The commotion that all of them were making was drawing the attention of everyone within the department, making Zoe feel uncomfortable. "I see that the two of you are as FR. Here I am." A loud yawn cut through the tension. Everyone paused, and all eyes fell on the inconspicuous-looking figure standing next to Kyle. Ignoring all of the attention he was getting, and holding onto the cup of coffee in his hand, Seth groggily looked at Kyle. "I'm going to go back to work." Squinting his eyelids as if trying his best to keep himself from falling asleep, Seth proceeded to move towards his office, completely ignoring everything that was going on around him. Zoe's eyes traced Seth's retreating figure as she watched him slowly enter the office. Although she didn't know Seth all too well, she knew that if Seth wanted to leave, he'd leave quietly. His yawn was also a little exaggerated, meaning, "He did that on purpose, didn't he?" But why would he do that? Is it because he noticed just how uncomfortable the situation was getting? Zoe nibbled on her lips. The more she thought about Seth, the weirder he appeared in her mind. He was one of the few people she couldn't understand at all. Who was that? Seeing Kalen squinting his eyes as his eyes traced Seth's back, Zoe snapped out of it and looked at him. Opening her mouth, she was just about to answer when Kyle beat her to it. He's our therapist. Chuckling slightly, Kyle hopped off the table and smiled. Don't pay him too much mind. He's rather tired from all the work he's had to do recently. How about I show you around? Kyle didn't wait for them to say anything before going off on his own. Follow me, there's quite a bit you need to get familiar with. Click, click, click. The clicking of the keyboard was all I could hear. It was the only sound I had been hearing for the past week or so. My fingers were beginning to ache, and the only thing keeping me going was the bitter bite of the coffee beside me. Ugh. Groaning, I ruffled my hair. I really need to find a way to hire a team. I paused to stretch my fingers and stared at the work in front of me. Over the past several weeks, I'd made solid progress, completing the 3D models, setting up the game's structure, and locking in the core mechanics. Most of it was finally in place. The game was still far from complete, but the hard part was done. Furthermore, it was also playable to some extent. Sure, there were no textures, and the storyline had yet to be added, but the character could move, and the physics was in place. I still need to render the game and work on optimization. As for the storyline, I have a rough idea, but I'll need to dig deeper and do more research before it's solid. In order for the game to fully click, I needed a proper storyline. This was the part that I left for last, since I didn't really know where to start in that regard. A good horror game needs a proper storyline to immerse the player in the game. If the storyline fell flat, it'd end up as nothing more than a cheap horror game packed with jump scares, a formula that might barely scrape a 1-star rating if the system was feeling generous. The issue was that I wasn't very creative in that regard. I was merely a game developer, not a writer. Usually, games had their own writing department for that stuff. I thought that by focusing on the game development, I'd eventually think of something for the storyline, but even as the weeks passed, my mind remained blank. Besides the most basic storyline, I really didn't have anything. Things can't go on like this. Placing the cup of coffee down, I crossed my arms and leaned back on my chair. The game I was designing was clearly inspired by the Twisted Man and everything I had gone through when experiencing the situation firsthand. The mechanics were also simple. All one had to do was keep their gaze away from the Twisted Man, and they wouldn't be attacked by it. I thought about adding a voice recording function, but that just felt a little too difficult to program. I also added several features that forced someone to look around. That way, the game wouldn't simply end with the player never touching their mouse in order to clear. Now that I think about it, there really wasn't too much information about the Twisted Man besides the weird poem and some of its previous actions in the other islands. I wonder if the Twisted Man had some sort of history behind it. I felt like understanding the history behind it would help me create a proper background for the storyline and add depth to it. Unfortunately, even the guild was unsure, and there were no other CL. Ding! Chain quest activated. Difficulty 2nd order. Reward 10,000 SP plus lucky wheel. Objective: discover the origin of the Twisted Man. Location: Harmia Island. Description: to deepen your game's storyline, you'll need to uncover more about the Twisted Man. Head to the location where it was first seen. There you might find clues about its origin and the truth behind its existence. Time limit: 4 days. The sudden notification and the window that appeared out of nowhere in front of my vision left me momentarily shaken. By the time I snapped out of it, I stood up abruptly. This you are shit. But the moment I did, I knocked the coffee on the table and spilled it all over my pants. Shit. Startled, I pushed back from the table and quickly patted my pants, grabbing a nearby tissue to wipe everything down. Fuck, of all times it had to happen, it had to be now. I really liked the pants too. Nonetheless, after wiping my pants, I proceeded to look at the quest once more and frowned. There were a couple of things that immediately caught my attention. Lucky Wheel, Harmia Island. I could more or less guess what each one was. The lucky wheel was probably some kind of reward spinner, where the prize depended on where the arrow landed, while Hamia Island seemed to be another island orbiting somewhere nearby. Knowing just how bad my luck was, I wasn't all that excited about the wheel. The only thing that made the trip worthwhile was the 10,000 SP reward, and the fact that it was given to me to help me with my game development. There also didn't seem to be any penalty for failing the quest, which was a bonus. In fact, thinking about it, none of the quests had any penalties, nor was I really forced to take them on. This made me feel much more at ease. It meant that I had a choice of whether to take them or not, instead of being forced into taking them. I could very well reject this quest if I wanted to. Not that I planned to, since it was specifically made to help me. Dabbing my pants with a few other tissues and cleaning up the table, I did a quick research on the island before closing down my laptop and placing it into my bag. Time was scarce, and there was no time to waste. There's a flight that should head out for the island in a couple of hours. I should take that. Packing all of my essentials, I booked the train using my phone and got out of the office. Unlike before, the place was completely deserted, with no one in sight. A pity. I wanted to tell Kyle that I'm leaving, but I guess I'll just send him a message. Either way, I'm not going to be away for long. Getting from one island to another wasn't too difficult. Each island had its own airport, and so all one had to do was book a flight and go to the nearest airport before flying to said island. The distance between Malavia Island and Hamia Island was about a 4-hour journey. It was neither too long nor too small. During the flight, I spent most of the time researching the island. From what I managed to gather, the population of the place was a lot smaller than Malavia's, but it could still be considered quite big. There were no king-grade guilds on the island, but several rook-grade ones and a single queen-grade. The island's architecture had an older Gothic style, with the weather being a fair bit colder than Malavia. It was a pity that I found out about the weather a little late. It also says that it rains a lot there. I might be screwed. I didn't bring much with me. Just a bit of spare clothes. Whatever, I can just buy some clothes when I get there. I could at least afford that much. It wasn't like I had converted all my money into SP. I kept some just in case of an emergency. Good thing I did that. I'd really be screwed otherwise. Oh, while I'm at it, I'll see if there's some sort of market I can buy fragments on the island. That would be of considerable help. Thinking thus far, I grew a little restless as I couldn't wait for the flight to finally arrive. This sure does look different. The first thing I noticed while coming out of the airport was the change in the architecture. Long gone was the modern look, replaced by towering spires, narrow archways and soot-darkened stone. Lamps lined the cobblestone streets as the grey clouds covered the sky. It looked like it would rain at any second. But most importantly, it's damn cold. I quickly covered up with a jacket, bringing my hands to my mouth and huffing warm breath over my fingers. While I knew it was cold, it was still colder than I expected. Maybe I should go buy some stuff later. I'd like to go to the city center. I made a mental note to myself before taking a taxi and going to the heart of the city. For now, the most important thing that I needed to do was understand more about the Twisted Man and its origins. The quest brought me here, but it didn't specify what I needed to do. Still, I don't think it should be too hard. I'm sure some locals might know about the situation, and if worst comes to worst, I can just ask the guilds. If the locals were clueless, the guilds surely weren't. They'd at least know something. It took about 20 minutes for the cab to reach near the heart of the city, stopping just at the edge where the old road began to rise in a slight slope. Cars aren't allowed in the city. This is as far as I can bring you. This is fine. Scanning my phone with the drivers, I quickly paid and hopped out of the cab before heading toward the heart of the city. Pubs and cafes lined the street, their signs swinging gently in the wind, and the uneven cobblestones made each step feel just a bit awkward. The pubs were relatively full, with people standing outside in the biting cold while holding onto large pints of beer. They all talked with one another, some leaning against the side of the buildings. I tried listening in on their conversation, but I gave up after a few seconds. Their accents. I can't understand a single thing. They were speaking English, but it almost felt like they weren't. Just trying to decipher their words was enough to give me a headache, so I gave up on following their conversation and drifted elsewhere, letting the noise fade into the background. No matter how much I search on the web, I can't find anything. Do I have no other choice but to make conversation with the locals? The thought made me feel nauseous. I kind of hated talking to strangers or people in general. If possible, I didn't really want to talk to anyone, but seeing no news about the twisted man on my phone, it looked like I didn't have much choice. With a quiet sigh, I scanned the street and eventually spotted a group speaking English that was clear enough to understand. I ended up approaching them. "Excuse me. HM." The first one to stare at me was a chubby man with thinning white hair and a graying mustache. He sat on a stool, his body leaning on the table next to him. "I've never seen you before. Who might you be?" "I'm not from around here." "A tourist." The man's brow raised in surprise. "At such times, you mustn't have done your research." He began to chuckle alongside his 3 other friends. I could only force a smile while waiting for them to finish. The chance came a minute after. "Actually, I'm not really a tourist. I'm more here for work. I'd love to be a tourist, but I don't have the time to be one." I retrieved my wall and displayed my guild badge. "I'm actually here to investigate a certain case that happened a while back in this city. If any of you have any clues, it would be helpful." The faces of the group immediately changed the moment I spoke. I could feel a certain tension linger in the air as the group stared at each other. Eventually, the chubby man spoke, his tone a lot heavier than before. "What are you trying to ask for?" I could tell from his sudden change in demeanor that I was touching on some sort of taboo topic. But that gave me all the reason to ask further. The more they act like this, the more likely I'm onto something. I'll be blunt, recently there's been an incident with a certain anomaly in Moldova Island. We've managed to contain it, but I'm looking for some information about it. I've heard the anomaly appeared on the island quite a while back, about a certain twisted man. Do you have any information from me? Later. My words were met with silence. The tension that lingered before grew more pronounced as the 4 men looked at me. Seeing how silent they were, I opened my mouth again, but I was cut off by the chubby man. "Earl Street 15. HM. Go there and you'll find what you need." Earl Street 15, find what I need. I wanted to ask more, but the moment I tried, the group started talking with one another, completely ignoring my presence. Getting the message, I stopped trying and took out my phone, opening the navigation app and inputting the address. Oh, so it's not too far from where I am. It said that it was a 20-minute walk, which wasn't exactly short, but it was walking distance. As such, without wasting any time, I headed in the direction of the address. Walking along the streets, I realized that the closer I got to my destination, the more rundown everything became. The cobblestone path grew increasingly worn, with stones missing and holes all over. Cracks crept along the sides of buildings, and graffiti began to cover the walls in layers. There was also a terrible stench filling the air. It smelled rotten, and after a certain point, I found myself covering up my nose due to how bad it was getting. How can someone even think of living here? Questions began to fill my mind as I drew closer to the destination. Was I being trolled? Did the group mess around with me and tell me the wrong information? That would make sense when thinking about it. The moment I pulled out my badge and asked questions, they all felt strangely hostile. I didn't know why, but I could see why they'd lie to me. Still, since I had already made my way to the destination, I planned on seeing it through to the end. In the end, I still had 4 days to find the right place. This wasn't going to set me back by much. It should be this place. Eventually, I came to a stop in front of a residential building. The lower levels were riddled with cracks, the concrete crumbling in places, while garbage bags were piled haphazardly along the outer walls. A narrow set of metal stairs clung to the side of the building, rusted all over, leading up to the second floor, where the dim lights of a single apartment glowed. It was the only apartment with the lights on. After a little bit of hesitation, I decided to make my way there before knocking on the door. Hello? To talk? Is anybody in there? I took a step back after knocking, waiting for someone to open the door. A stifling silence followed as I waited, feeling the sounds around me enhance, from the creaking of the metal railing beneath to the slight dripping sound of the broken pipes. All of it felt pronounced, growing louder with each second. But soon, Creedialak. The door creaked open, and a pair of sunken eyes peered out from behind, enough to make me shudder as an aged voice shattered the silence. Who are you? The moment the eyes locked on me, I froze for a moment, my body shuddering, but it was only for a brief moment as I quickly snapped out of it. Pardon for my sudden intrusion. While trying to be as polite as possible, I took out my guild badge and showed it to the old woman as she clung to the side of the wooden door. I come from a relatively well-known guild, and I'm here to investigate a certain matter regarding a recent anomaly that we've caught. I've been told to come here when I asked around. I hope that I didn't disturb you. I smiled right after I was done speaking, making sure to make it look as friendly as possible. This isn't too bad, right? I felt like I had been extremely polite with my words, enough to give a good lasting impression. However, clank. My smile froze as the door slammed shut right before my eyes. What? Go disturb someone else. I have no time for you people. Her words were followed by the muffled sound of footsteps leaving, and the silence returned. I could only stand numbly outside the door. Of all the scenarios that I had formulated in my mind, this was one of the few that I didn't even think of. What now? I was at a loss. I had come here with the intent of finding something out, but in the end, this ended up being a bust. So, it was a prank in the end. I wanted to think so, but at the same time, recalling how fast the old woman closed the door, I had reason to believe that it wasn't the case. She was hiding something, or at least she knew something. Knocking on her door again might not bring any result. It might only just make her more annoyed with me. Then, should I get the Dreamwalker to sneak in? I immediately dismissed the thought. Firstly, I was afraid the Dreamwalker would lunge at me and start wrestling me. Although it was likely it wouldn't, there was still a chance. Not only that, but what would even come out of me sending the Dreamwalker into the house? I couldn't share the vision with it, nor could I talk to it. Then, should I send Mile? I also shook my head. That didn't seem feasible. Same situation with the Dreamwalker, and I was also afraid she'd play some sort of prank on the old lady, giving her some sort of heart attack. Mile was definitely the type of anomaly that would do that. So then, don't tell me that I have to do it myself. I inwardly groaned. Just the thought of forcing my way into the house of an old lady made me want to curse at myself. How could I do that to an old lady? I shook my head. Although I feel like this, it won't change the fact that I'll probably still force my way in. I did feel guilty, but my life came first. I could only secretly apologize to the old lady. Still, it wasn't like I planned on infiltrating her house just yet. She was probably already alert from my presence. Going in now would only make it easier for her to catch me. The best time for me to go was at night when she was sleeping. In the meantime, I'll go elsewhere and look for more clues. I felt that this was the most appropriate course of action. I also wanted to make sure she knew that I had left, so that she would be less wary of me. Well, I guess it was a prank after all. Scratching the back of my head while making sure my voice was loud enough, I turned around and headed away from the building. Making my way down the stairs, I turned around to take one last look at the house, but right as I turned, my expression froze. Peering through the blinds of the window was an eye. It stared straight at me, the sclera was tinged yellow, and a thick clot of dark blood pooled at the edge of the pupil, pulsing faintly as if alive. A chill rippled down my spine. Without wasting another second, I turned around and dipped away, holding onto the side of my arms as I felt goosebumps all over my body. Creepy, so damn creepy. Making my way out of the weird area and back onto the main street, I leaned my hand against the side of the wall while letting out a long breath. Fuck, that was creepy. And here I thought I had seen my fair share of creepy things. This world just kept on giving, one creepy thing after another. What should I do now? I looked at my watch. It was still quite early. Even if the old woman was an early sleeper, it would take several hours before the sun set. Looking around and taking out my phone, I decided to find out more about the situation and ask more locals. Perhaps I didn't even need to go into the old lady's house. In fact, I preferred that it were the case. In the meantime, I'll also go ahead and buy some new clothes. It's really too cold in here. With my mind made up, I headed for the nearest store to buy myself a nice jacket and some thermal clothing. After that, I went around the city to ask for more information from the locals. But ask the old lady at Earl Street. Don't bother me, I don't know. Go to Earl Street. In the end, I received the same two answers, to either leave them alone or go visit the same place as before. In the end, I was right, there's something up with the place. If before I could have dismissed it as a prank, that was no longer the case. The key to solving this scenario was that old lady and her house. Since she didn't want to tell me a single thing, the only thing I could do was sneak into her house and look for clues for myself. Although I didn't want to do that, this was my best course of action. I wanted to try and convince the old lady, but considering my time constraint, it was best for me to go ahead and look for the clues myself. Plus, she was just an old lady. There wasn't much that I needed to fear. Hi. With a long sigh, I raised my head to look at the dimming sky. While the environment was already grim due to the clouds that hung in the sky, the moment the sun started to set and the darkness started to take over, something about the place changed. It felt darker, grimmer. The faintly flickering lamps by the side of the street didn't help with the ambience. Pulling my eyes away, I focused them in a certain direction. I'll just go in, look for whatever I need and leave. I'll be gone before she even realizes it. I planned on making things quick. Go in, find a clue, and leave. I also planned to be as silent as possible. Either way, I planned on making it quick since I didn't want to be there anyway. Just thinking about the place in the darkness was enough to make my stomach churn. Taking a pause, I focused my gaze on a nearby trash bin while holding onto my rumbling stomach. Should I? The streetlights lit the path only so far. As I approached Earl Street, their glow began to fade. Until there was nothing left. Only darkness remained, swallowing the street in silence, broken only by the faint, rhythmic echo of my own footsteps. Despite my best attempts at keeping quiet, the sound still echoed, and soon I arrived at my destination. The lights are off. I sighed in relief when I noticed that. This made things easier for me as I carefully moved towards the house, slowly climbing the steps to the second floor without making any sound, eventually stepping by the door and lowering my body where I looked at the keyhole. There is no key on the other side, but I can tell that it's locked. Standing up again, I carefully placed the tip of my finger over the keyhole as I activated my most recent skill, and a black film began to seep out from my finger, moving into the keyhole and filling the space completely. Once I felt the entire space was filled, I solidified it before turning my finger. Click! And just like that, the door opened. This sure is a handy skill. Perhaps I needed to be nicer to the Dreamwalker. If the Dreamwalker evolved further, it would provide me with even more useful skills. Kriya. I nearly had a heart attack as a faint creaking sound echoed the moment the door moved, and I hastily reached out for it and stopped it from moving. Silence returned once more after that. Or at least I thought it did. I wasn't too sure since all I could hear was the rhythmic drumming of my own heart. Looking into the house, I realized that the place was even darker than the world outside. Thankfully, I came prepared and slowly retrieved my glasses. With them, I was confident in seeing through the dark, but at the same time, I felt hesitant. Recalling what had happened the previous time that I had used the glasses, I wasn't so sure if it was such a great idea to use them. But the circumstances back then were different. I was dealing with an anomaly back then. I'm just dealing with an old lady this time. I don't think I need to worry too much. Taking a couple of deep breaths, I eventually put the glasses on, and the world around me turned blue, and the surrounding temperature plummeted even further, causing my lips to start to tremble. Fuck. Even with the new jacket and the thermal, I could feel the cold seeping right into my body. I need to make this quick. I don't think I can last long with how cold it is. Pulling the jacket around me tighter, I pulled out my shoes and crept into the house, a barely discernible creaking sound echoing as the wooden floor beneath my feet sank. At the same time, I slowly and carefully closed the door behind me, making sure not to create any sound in the meantime as I looked around me. How could I even describe the place? It was a mess. Clothes were strewn across the floor, tangled with rotting trash and half-crushed boxes that looked like they hadn't been touched in weeks. The air was stale and heavy with something sour. Everywhere I looked, there was filth. Walls split with deep cracks, while the wallpaper curled and peeled like dead skin. It felt less like a home and more like an abandoned unit used by the homeless. I had to start breathing from my mouth in order to stop myself from gagging, but even then, taking in the air, I felt myself secretly gagging. Who can even live like this? Perhaps I started to understand the real reason why she didn't allow me into the house. No, it doesn't matter. Let me start looking for clues. The faster I do this, the quicker I can get out of this place. Stepping over the trash that was littered on the floor, I moved from the kitchen area to the living room. The entire apartment wasn't very large, with the kitchen and living room joined together. A set of stairs appeared at the gap between the living room and the kitchen area, leading to another floor. I presume the old lady is sleeping on the second floor. I couldn't be too sure, but just in case, I set up the Dreamwalker to watch over in case she decided to come down. As the Dreamwalker's silhouette appeared before my eyes, I could tell it wasn't looking at me in the friendliest of ways, but in the end, turning its head, it moved toward the stairs to do its job. This made me feel a lot more at ease as I reached the living room, which was even more of a mess than the kitchen area. There was even more garbage on the floor, and the moment I stepped into the room, I found myself pausing at the sight. Although I wasn't breathing through my nose, it almost felt like I could smell the stench that lingered in the air. It was nauseating and biting my lips, so I got to work. I just need to find some sort of clue, a painting, a paper, anything. Moving on top of the pile of garbage, I pulled a few apart and carefully sorted through everything. In order to make the least amount of noise, I tried to be as slow and careful as possible. There were a lot of clothes, and a lot of other nonsense that didn't seem useful. But then, I eventually pulled out what seemed to be a pair of pants. Looking at it, they seemed rather large. Perhaps it's from her husband. They were certainly too large for the old woman, and looking through the clothes, there was indeed quite a lot of male apparel. Seeing how old the clothes looked, it made sense to think that they were from her husband. But where was he? Was he in the house? As far as I was aware, appeared to be only one person living in the house. However, it could very likely be that there was someone else living in this dumpster of a place. Taking note of this information, I began my search once more. The operation that I thought would only take a few minutes ended up taking a lot longer than I expected due to how much garbage had been piled up on the floor, and just as I started to think that there was nothing useful, I ended up picking up a certain frame. It was quite dusty, but after a few swipes across the glass, an image gradually came into view. It was an image of a couple. A young couple standing by an old train, the man wearing a black suit and an eerily familiar top hat. Wait! I looked closer at the image, feeling my heart starting to slow down. Those clothes, that top hat. My eyes started to widen. And then, flick! Light flared into the room. Flick! A bright light suddenly burst into the room, dim yet sharp as it tore through the darkness. I flinched the moment the light came on, and my heart nearly leaped out of my chest. But as if that wasn't creepy enough, a tune began to play from the TV. Tralalalal tilde. Little star, little moon tilde. Shining bright, come back soon tilde. A nursery rhyme. It was one that I didn't hear before, and for a moment I froze in place. But not for long. Creedoak. A creaking sound followed right after, and I immediately grew startled. The old lady. I glanced around in panic, ready to make a move for the door, only to realize I was trapped, wedged in by piles of garbage. One wrong step and the noise would give me away. Shit, what do I do? I looked around me, looking for some sort of hiding spot. Creak. The footsteps drew closer, each one pounding in time with my racing heart. Panic rose as I scanned the room frantically, looking for something, anything. Surely there is something, maybe. My eyes eventually landed on the filthy sofa next to me. Gritting my teeth and stifling a gag, I dropped low and crawled beneath it, barely daring to breathe. The stench beneath became even more pronounced, and even though I was still trying my best to breathe through my mouth, some of the smell managed to enter my nose, almost making me gag. There were socks and all sorts of boxes littered across the wooden floor. I really want to puke. And it wasn't even because I was scared. The sight around me was just sickening, but at the same time, as I quietly pushed some stuff away, I noticed something on the wooden floor around me. A strange marking. Staring at it, I couldn't quite make out the color of the marking. Even without my glasses, it was hard to tell given how dark it was, but it looked red, a thin line, winding forward across the floor, like something had been dragged. It looked to stretch further, but all of the trash covered the particular marking. I wanted to see what it was, but I unfortunately didn't have the luxury for that as the steps drew even closer, finally loud enough for me to hear, and indicating to me that the old lady had finally arrived on the first floor. Drift with clouds, soft and where the sleepy flowers grow tilde. In the background, the nursery rhyme continued to play. The noise was soft, yet within the silence, it felt suffocating. Creak. A bare foot appeared before my eyes not long after, as I suddenly held my breath. She's here. I held my breath, trying my best not to make any noise. Strange. The old woman's voice whispered in the air, cutting through the nursery rhyme that played in the background. Why did the television turn on? Bar thump, bar thump. I could feel my very own heart drumming so loudly that I was almost afraid the old lady could hear it. However, I was quickly able to calm it down not long after. She's just a regular old lady. There is no need to be scared. If she finds me, I can just force my way out. I might get in trouble with the police the day after, but I can just figure something out if that happens. I was prepping my mind with all sorts of thoughts and ideas in order to calm myself down. Eventually, flick, the TV switched off and silence settled over the room. It was a strangely heavy silence that made me swallow silently. But most importantly, a dim light lingered even after the TV switched off, hovering from left to right. The old woman's voice echoed after, as the light continued to hover from right to left. This feels different from before. My hair rose on end the moment I heard her words. She could tell. But how? I had been very careful with my actions. Even though I was looking for clues and hints, I still put everything back the moment I was done with a certain area. Realistically speaking, everything should have looked the same as before. Ah, yes. A thin hand reached for the floor, pulling a certain item. It looked like a used box. This wasn't here before. What? And this over here, it was also not here before. How strange. The old lady continued to point things out, throwing me off with each item she listed. How in the world did she know? How could someone living like this have this type of memory? No, maybe it's because they have this type of memory that they can live like this. Whatever the case was, it was creeping me out as I covered my mouth while waiting for her to leave. Please just leave, please just leave, please just leave. Thankfully, my wishes were soon granted as the old lady tossed the items back onto the floor and mumbled, "I must be getting old." Creak. The floor creaked once more as she began to move away. But even as I heard her leave, I didn't move a single inch from the spot I was in, not even when I heard her reach the stairs and go up. Not even several minutes had passed. I remained glued to the floor with my eyes closed, allowing for the silence to embrace me. But that was until I remembered something and pulled out the photograph from before and took a look at it. I wasn't convinced before, but now that I am looking at it, I am certain that she has a connection with the twisted man. The clothes the man in the photo was wearing were identical to those of the twisted man. I could see it clearly. There's no doubt in my mind that this is relevant to the twisted man, but who is this man? Is he her husband like I suspect? And this is her right. I really want to get out of the spot and ask her. However, I was more afraid of scaring her to the point of her getting a heart attack than anything else. Still, this was a lead. All I had to do after this was follow up on the lead and figure out more about her husband. Analyzing the picture in my hand for a little bit longer, I looked out. I think it's safe for me to leave. I had heard the woman move up to the second floor, and I had waited long enough to make sure there was nobody else in the room. Carefully pushing some stuff out, I made my way out of the sofa while trying my best not to gag. Stretching my back, I was just about to leave when... Flick! Tralalal tilde. Little star, little moon tilde. Shining bright, come back soon tilde. The television turned on, lighting up the surroundings once more as I hastily raised my head in the direction of the TV, my entire body freezing in place as an elderly woman stood right behind it, her sunken eyes staring right at me as she held onto a portable lamp. As expected, there really was someone. For a moment, I stopped breathing. The moment that I saw the old woman standing behind the TV, I momentarily froze before eventually snapping out of it and taking a step back. How in the world? I swear I heard her go up the stairs. I was quite certain about what I'd heard. How was this possible? It made absolutely no sense to me, but at the same time, I knew that this wasn't the time for me to dwell on the situation, as I felt the old woman's empty gaze fall on me as she held onto a small candle lamp that flickered across the room. I slowly pulled the glasses away from my face. So it's the same young man from before. The old woman's voice was brittle, nearly a whisper, but it was that very fragility that sent a chill crawling up the back of my neck. Creepy. It was so damn creepy. What do we have here? Her gaze eventually lowered towards the photo in my hand. Oh dear. The old woman's empty gaze flickered as she focused her attention on the photo. That is a photo that I took with my first husband way back then. He was just about to depart for a long work trip. For whatever reason, the old woman appeared talkative. I didn't stop her and just listened to her words. First husband. So she remarried. Her face grew a little sullen as her head lowered a little. It's really too bad that he never came back after that trip. A brief silence followed her words. A deep and chilling silence that was shattered by the nursery rhyme that continued to play in the background. Drift with clouds, soft and slow. Where the sleepy flowers grow tilde. Click. The old woman pressed the power button and the TV shut down. The room grew a little dimmer as a result. But tell me, young man. Finally speaking once more, the old woman cocked her head to the side, her empty eyes seemingly growing darker within the dark ambience. I wasn't sure whether it was because of the environment or because I was tired, but it almost felt as though her eyes were growing entirely back, and that was when I understood that I had to leave. I hastily looked around, settling my gaze on the distant door. As I did, the old woman's voice echoed once more. Why have you come here so late at night? I told you that I didn't want anything to do with the situation. I was just about to respond when... Flick! The lamp in her hand flickered, and darkness took over the room. Thump thump. It was a darkness that was followed by the sound of muffled steps coming from the direction of the TV, and that was when I understood that the old woman was coming. I immediately turned around and bolted for the door, sprinting as far as I could. Where are you going? Now that you're here, you might as well stay. No, fuck that. I kicked the garbage in front of me and rushed with all my might, not caring about what I was stepping on. Although logically, it could be argued that I could beat up the old woman, for some reason, I felt that it was going to be a terrible idea. That was why I directly headed for the door. But, click. Shit. Of course, it was locked. Even though I had somehow managed to pick the door, it was locked. There really was something off about this place. Thump thump. Hearing the sound of the old lady approaching, I thought about picking the lock again, but I realized I wouldn't have enough time. In quick succession, I looked at the nearby window and rejoiced when I saw that it was open. Yes. I didn't think twice and rushed in that direction, but... Bang! The moment I moved, the window slammed shut and I froze where I stood. The old lady was there again, not far from me, her features obscured by the thick veil of darkness that cloaked the room. Like I said, you can't leave. She almost growled those words as I started to shiver. But most importantly, I realized something. She's no regular person. I had already gotten an idea the moment that she appeared out of nowhere, despite me hearing her going up the stairs. But this went ahead and confirmed all of my suspicions. This woman, without a doubt, had powers. Fuck. I really wanted to curse myself for my luck, but at the same time, I knew that I couldn't waste time as I tried to move back towards the door, hopping to waste some time while opening it. It was just unfortunate that the old lady appeared to see right through my intention as she smiled creepily, the edges of her lips curling into a smile so twisted that it made my breath pause. Flick! The lamp turned off again, and I could feel her rushing in my direction. I acted quickly. Without a moment's hesitation, I raised my hand, and a tall shadow emerged before me, gliding toward the old woman as I moved past them. Bang! I heard a loud crashing sound, and saw the dreamwalker tumbling back with the old woman as she let out a surprised yelp. I thought about going for the door again, but it was too far from me now, and the old woman was standing not far from it. Fuck, where do I go now? Putting on my glasses, I quickly located the stairs and rushed up. There were always the windows upstairs. I didn't know how long the dreamwalker could hold her up, but I could only hope it was enough for me to escape as I reached the second floor. Was, where do I go? Several doors met my sight the moment I reached the floor, but it didn't really matter. My goal was to break one of the windows and leave. That was why I reached for the nearest door and tried to pull it open, but... Click! It was also locked. Not just that door, all of the doors were locked. She really isn't making this easy for me. Thump, thump. My heart jolted as I heard the sound of footsteps coming from downstairs. I could tell that she was coming for me. Thankfully, the dreamwalker was still alive, as I didn't feel anything on my wrist. But given how the old woman was approaching, it failed to stop her. This made me even more apprehensive. For her to stop the dreamwalker, just how strong was she? I extended my hand, activated my skill, and pressed a finger to the door key, waiting in tense silence as a black viscous liquid fell into the keyhole. Thump, thump, thump. In the meantime, the footsteps grew closer, and my heart caught in my throat. Come on, come on, come on. Biting my lips, the steps finally became loud enough for me to fully hear, and I understood that the old lady had finally arrived on the second floor. There. It was also in that moment that the makeshift key solidified, and I twisted the door open. Click. I didn't hesitate to enter before smashing it closed. At the same time that I did, the last thing I saw was a pair of hollow eyes staring right at me. Clank. Silence followed right after I closed the door. But that silence didn't last for very long. Click, click, click. The doorknob started to turn and click as I felt it turn right and left as the old lady was trying to force her way in. Recalling just how powerful she was, I knew that the door was going to break soon enough. Or at least, that was what I thought at first. After a couple of tries, the clicking sound stopped. And then, thump, thump. I heard the muffled sound of her steps as she began to leave. She's leaving. I was at a loss at first, but then, recalling what had happened before, I understood that it was very likely a trap. I wasn't going to fall for it again, and without pause, I turned my attention towards the distant window and made my way towards it. Still, what a mess. Even her room is just as bad. Trash littered the floor yet again. This time, it was even worse than the living room beneath, and I had to take big steps in order to properly move around the trash. By now, I had already gotten used to the stench, and so it no longer worried me. Arriving by the window, I tapped on the glass once before a viscous black liquid coated it, turning it into a hammer. Taking a step back, I prepared to break the window when I stopped and looked outside the window. A pair of hollow eyes stared right at me, and I froze on the spot. Standing right outside the window, looking at me from below, was the old woman, her lamp raised as she looked at me. A quiet dread settled over my chest then as I took a step back. So it wasn't fake, were the steps real? She left and moved downstairs, but that was fast. I felt my lips tremble as I took another step back. But it was also then that I felt something on my ankle, and I tripped back. The pile of trash broke my fall, but as I glanced down to see what had tripped me, a lump rose in my throat. I was staring at what looked like a shriveled, dried-up hand. Oh shit. The more I looked at it, the more certain I was, and my heart slammed so hard against my ribs, it almost felt like it was trying to escape. But that wasn't all. Looking carefully at the hand, I saw a familiar-looking suit, and despite every part of me screaming to stay away, I reached hesitantly towards the trash around the corpse and moved it away to reveal the body. The sight that greeted me right after I did that left me completely and utterly paralyzed as I covered my mouth and stood up. The corpse was the same as all of the victims of the Twisted Man, mummified to the point where it looked like its body was completely drained of all blood, while its eyes slowly blinked, and its mouth opened and closed slowly. That it was still alive. But that wasn't the creepiest part of it all. The creepiest part was what the corpse was wearing. It was the same top hat and suit as the Twisted Man. What sort of? Swallowing my saliva, I turned my attention towards the photograph in my hand and confirmed that it was indeed the same clothes, but at the same time I also noticed another photograph by the corpse's body. I hesitated for a moment before picking it up and turning it over. I wished I never did. Flipping the photograph over, my thoughts paused as I pulled out the other one and stared between the two, my gaze shifting back and forth in disbelief. I had a hard time comprehending the situation. The photographs both depicted the same scene, a couple standing by a train, wearing the same clothes and posing with the same expression. They looked like the perfect couple. But there was only one issue. No, two glaring issues. The old woman, she was the same woman as in the first photograph. The only difference was that she was older than in the previous photo, a few wrinkles appearing beneath her eyes and nose, but it wasn't her appearance that threw me off. What truly threw me off was the man. Despite wearing the same suit and top hat, he was a completely different person. Yes, looking at the two photos, it was clear to me that the two were completely different people. From how he looked older than the man in the previous photo, to the eye color, hair length, and general face structure. They couldn't have been more different. It was also then that I recalled the old woman's words. That is a photo that I took with my first husband way back then. He was just about to depart for a long work trip. It's really too bad that he never came back after that trip. I took a deep breath, trying my best to stay rational, as I sorted through all of the clues and information that I had managed to gather so far. Seeing how she looks older here and how the image of the person in the photo looks different, it is safe to assume that this is her second husband. Yes, that must be the case. But why did she decide to replicate the photo? And I looked down at the corpse that was not far from me and looked at the photograph again, trying my best to keep my hand from trembling. Is this her second husband? Why is he like this? What happened? What is her link with the Twisted Man? Why would he be here? There were so many questions in my mind, and yet so few answers. My head ached just thinking about the situation, but I also knew that I couldn't waste any more time. Taking a closer step, I peeked at the window, trying to see if the old lady was still there, but she was gone. The area outside where she once stood was empty. Wait, if she isn't there, where is SH? Click. A subtle clicking sound echoed across the room and my body stiffened as the doorknob by the side twisted gently and an elderly figure appeared. I didn't even hesitate. Rushing towards the door, I slammed my shoulder against the door as the woman's hand wedged between the door. A sickening crack reached my ears shortly after as I let go of the door and rushed towards the window, where I smashed it directly with my fist that was coated in the black substance. Bang! Looking back, the door burst open, and the old lady appeared once more. Our eyes met for the briefest of moments, as I eventually jumped down from the second floor, my legs taking on the full impact of the fall as I rushed away. Run, I just need to run. I didn't look back once while I rushed away. I just knew that I had to run. That was all I knew. Just run. How is her? My lungs were on fire. I had no idea how long I'd been running. I just kept going, as fast and as far as my legs would carry me. The thought of that old woman chasing me pushed me forward and I couldn't stop. I didn't even know where I was heading. All I knew was that I had to get as far away as possible from the place. Creepy, too damn creepy. Too. Eventually, my stamina gave out, and I stumbled to a stop beside a narrow alleyway. It was dimly lit, the walls marked with scattered graffiti. Two large dumpsters sat off to the side, surrounded by torn, overstuffed garbage bags. The smell was tolerable, It was a lot better than that dumpster fire that was the old lady's house. I think this should be good enough. I moved by the wall and rested my back against it. I thought about sliding down in order to rest, but seeing how dirty the place was, I thought otherwise. I wasn't a clean freak or anything, but ever since I'd stepped into that old lady's house, the sight of trash had started to make me feel nauseous. Whatever the reason, right now I just needed to catch my breath. I took slow, steady inhales as I pulled out my phone and searched for the nearest flight back to Malavia Island. It was time to go. The quest should be completed too, right? I did manage to find some clues regarding the twisted man by finding the photographs. This should be enough. Please let this be enough. I could only hope and pray that I had met all the criteria for the quest to complete, but as the minutes dragged on, maybe half an hour or more, nothing happened. The quest window never appeared, and a sinking feeling settled in my chest. It can usually take longer, but I'm afraid that, even if I wait a little longer, I'll probably not receive a single thing. To make matters worse, when I checked the flights back to Malavia, the next one wasn't until 8 a.m. It was only 1 a.m. I still had 7 long hours to wait. And even then, who was there to say nothing would happen at the airport? Something about this place, this city. Something about it felt extremely off to me. It was almost as if everyone was in on it, as though the old woman's influence ran deep within the place. But maybe I was just overthinking. There was no real evidence to back up the thought, and it was entirely possible I was just being overly paranoid. However, whatever the case was, I decided to trust my own gut feeling. There's nothing wrong with trusting my gut feeling, even if it's wrong. The worst that can happen is that I waste 7 hours. Either way, I'm stuck here until the next plane. Sigh. A deep and long sigh escaped my lips as I thought about my current situation. Given the likely chance that the quest had yet to be completed, I knew that there was still more for me to find. Should I just quit and stay here while waiting for the next flight to arrive? This seemed like the most reasonable way to look at things. The situation felt genuinely dangerous, and it wasn't as if the quest had been forced on me. I could back out at any time. The amount of SP offered wasn't insignificant, but for now, it was something I could afford to ignore. But at the same time, is it worth it to abandon the quest? The whole point of this quest was to help me develop my game. It was to add depth to it and make it better. Could I really give up a quest that would help me build a better game that could traumatize more people? Later, I held onto my chest. Logic told me to just wait here and wait for the plane to arrive, but no, I can't. It wasn't just because I wanted to clear the quest, and I couldn't afford to ignore the reward. It was more about the fact that I felt there was some sort of grand scheme behind this entire situation. While the system had indeed assigned this quest to me, I had a feeling that it wasn't just to help me develop the game. There was definitely more to it. I just needed to figure out what. And the key to it all was the 2 photographs in my hand. Staring at them and alternating my gaze between the two, I grew more and more creeped out by how uncanny the 2 photos were. Despite being 2 different timelines, the photos were of the same quality, and the poses and expressions were exactly the same. They both stood behind a certain train. My eyes squinted as I looked at the train, a thought occurring to me. Could this be a clue? Could the train be where I had to go next to figure out the situation? Why did she take a photo here? Where does the train lead? Why were they going on the train? All sorts of questions crossed my mind as I stared at the image. The more questions that arose in my mind, the more certain I was that the key to the situation was the train. Hence, taking out my phone, I quickly researched all the nearby train stations. I got the results not long after. Elderglen Junction. All right, this should be my next stop. Putting my phone away, I pulled myself away from the wall and followed the directions from my phone. The Elderglen Junction was located not far from the airport. It was a 30-minute walk from the heart of the city, tucked away near its edge. The street lamps flickered dimly, casting a faint glow over the cobblestone road as the night air sank into my bones, prickling my exposed skin from all directions. The streets were dead silent. Stopping beside a large metal fence, I switched on my flashlight and aimed it at the tracks ahead. In the distance, I could make out several trains and cargo cars scattered along the railway, some resting on the tracks, others off to the side. Some sat slumped across the tracks, others leaned off to the side, like broken bones in a forgotten graveyard. The place was quiet, and there didn't seem to be anyone present. I could make out the outlines of several trains in the distance, but the flashlight wasn't strong enough for me to see clearly. It didn't matter. Hup! I jumped up, grabbed hold of the metal fence, and pulled myself up. With a bit of effort, I swung over and landed on the other side. Thump! I landed softly and kept my flashlight pointed ahead. A strong, iron scent filled my nose, prompting me to momentarily pause. For a moment, I almost thought it was blood. However, the smell was different. It smelled a lot more rusty. Fuck, has all the blood I've been seeing lately even made me tell if something is blood or not by the smell? My lip twitched. I didn't know how to feel about that. The flashlight jittered in my grip, casting uneasy shadows that seemed to twitch along the walls. There wasn't much to go off from the photo I had. The most noticeable feature was the large, old train, which stood out more than anything else. That was my only lead. But even after scanning the station, it was nowhere in sight. Right, it would make sense if it's gone. A lot of time must have passed, I'm sure that. Not even halfway through my thoughts, and a massive shadow loomed before me in the distance. By the time I managed to figure out what it was, my hand froze as I opened my mouth before closing it. Staring at the all-too-familiar train, I pulled out one of the photos and held it up, shifting my gaze back and forth between the image and the real thing. I eventually shook my head. Hasn't changed one bit. Not even one bit. The train towered above me, its massive black metallic frame blending with the darkness around. I hadn't spotted it at first because it was set back from the main track, hidden behind one of the platforms. From a distance, it looked like part of the wall, but once I cast my light on it, everything became clear to me. This was the train I had been looking for. What now? I had found the train, but what next? I scanned the area, searching for anything that might offer a clue, but there was nothing. The train looked completely abandoned. Taking out the photographs, I even went as far as to go to the same spot to see if I could figure something out, but there really was nothing. Surely there must be some sort of record about the train, about where it went in the past, and for how long it operated. I tried looking for such answers on the internet, but that also led to nothing. I also went as far as putting on the glasses, but nothing. Absolutely nothing. There was nothing for me to see. Could I have guessed wrong? That could have been the case. I felt rather stumped at the situation as I took a brief pause to contemplate it. Eventually, however, I craned my neck to stare at the massive frame before me and decided to enter the train. Perhaps I could find a clue inside. Thankfully, getting onto the train wasn't difficult. The doors weren't locked, and after giving one a firm pull, it opened with a soft metallic creak. Moving onto the train, I looked around. The chairs were lined up on both sides, made of soft fabric stretched over wooden frames, all facing each other. A worn, dirty carpet covered the floor, muffling my steps. The windows on both sides were clouded with dust and grime, making it almost impossible to see through. I casually walked around the place, inspecting every inch of it. I was hoping to find more clues about the situation, but nothing. I couldn't find a single thing that could help with my investigation. In a last-ditch effort, I pulled out my glasses and slipped them on. The cold around me seemed to deepen, sinking further into my skin as I scanned the space again. I hadn't expected much when I put them on. Honestly, I was just grasping at straws. But then, I saw it. Footprints, they glowed faintly under the blue light of the glasses as they trailed forward, leading toward another carriage. I followed their path with my eyes until they stopped at the door, separating this carriage from the next. I licked my dry lips and stepped forward, following the glowing footprints. A tightness settled in my chest as I reached the carriage door. With a slow breath, I pulled it open, revealing a familiar-looking carriage. Clank! The carriage was identical to the one I had just left. The glowing steps continued along the narrow aisle, leading straight to the very end, where they stopped beside a single seat. I was too far away to see what it led to, but I knew in that moment that whatever I was looking for was right there. My throat grew drier with each breath as I took a step forward, following the trail of footsteps. The closer I drew to the spot, the heavier the feeling in my chest grew. Nonetheless, I carried on. I had to carry on. I knew that I was onto something, and I needed to see through it. For some reason, as I moved toward the distant area, it felt like the space ahead of me was stretching. The path seemed to grow longer with every step, as if the train itself was warping to keep me from reaching it. But I knew that this was all an illusion. Soon I reached the spot and paused. Later. Slowly turning my head, my eyes traced the steps until they eventually paused towards a certain crack. Yes, an all too familiar crack where I saw hands move out from. Crack. At that moment, a sharp cracking sound echoed through the carriage. I instantly realized what was happening. I stepped back quickly and pulled off my glasses, just in time to see the space ahead of me split open, revealing a massive opening right in front of me. H-ho. Looking in, I could make out the outline of several corpses, and I covered my mouth. This situation. It was exactly the same as what had happened not too long ago. I also understood that this was most likely the main goal of the mission. I can already guess that in order to clear the quest, I need to enter the place. I bit my lip, staring at the crack without moving a single muscle. If this was the same as the crack from before, and there was the possibility of another twisted man appearing, I really didn't want to go. One experience was already bad enough. Realistically speaking, I know how to defeat it, but who is there to say that the twisted man won't be different? No, I don't think the risk is worth the reward. I was really close to talking myself out of the situation, but at the same time, thinking about everything that I had thought before, I pulled out my laptop from my bag and booted up the app, loading the chat box as I began typing. Is this part of the quest? I didn't have to wait long for an answer. Yes, okay. This pretty much confirmed my previous thoughts. This was part of the quest, meaning that it was within my capabilities. But so was the previous quest. I almost felt scammed while thinking about the previous quest. Will there be a twisted man inside? No answer. I scratched the side of my cheek. I felt quite distressed at the moment. I didn't want to go. I really didn't want to go. But I was going to go. I had made up my mind a while back. It was just that self-doubt was continuously trying to make me not go, but I was going to go. I have to go. This was all for myself. To become stronger, to learn to be less of a coward, to cure my disease, to be less passive. All of this was to help me improve. This was why I knew that I was going to go, but just because I was going to go didn't mean that I was going to go straight away. There were a few things that I planned on going over before entering. Since now I have the money, I'll buy some items that might be useful for me inside the strange space, maybe some sort of escape item. The amount of SP that I had was quite abundant. I didn't see why I couldn't invest some of the money in some items to help me. The thought of buying new items excited me somewhat, but at the same time, there was something else that was more important. Where is he? Scrolling through my contacts, my eyes eventually fell on a certain number. It should be this one. I was sure of it when I saw the annoying bastard name as the contact. It wasn't Kyle nor Miles. It was the section chief. Without hesitation, I pressed the number and began typing a message. This is my location, pick me up as soon as possible. I wasn't dense. I understood very well just how much the section chief valued me. At first I was confused, but then, putting everything together, it became pretty obvious to me that he valued my talent a lot. I was quite clear about his interest, and finally decided to put it to good use this time. He might be sleeping this time, but I'm sure that the moment he sees the message, he'll immediately come to me. I made sure to send him my location so that he could come as fast as possible. If my guess is correct, he'll definitely come. In order to make sure he did come, I specifically wrote 2 things. I'm in danger. It is something related to the Twisted Man case. Regardless of how busy he was, I was sure that this was enough to compel him to come. The main reason why I was doing this was simple. If I trust my gut feeling again and there's really something wrong with this entire city, then by the time I arrive at the airport, another situation might arise. If the section chief is here, I doubt anything will happen to me. I was essentially calling a personal bodyguard. At the same time, since this was related to the Twisted Man, I was sure that he'd be interested. This was, after all, a very complicated situation. My only problem with the situation was explaining to him why I came here and how I managed to find this, but to be honest, I didn't think explaining to him this part was that hard. Well, the part about me secretly infiltrating the house of an old lady was probably going to be a bit hard to explain, but that didn't matter. I now had enough evidence to prove that the old lady was related to this case. I'd probably be forgiven if this ended up being the truth. At least I hoped. Okay, I think this is good, now. I turned my attention towards my laptop and opened the shop app. A large interface appeared before me. Shop, second order. Quantum deck, discount 30%. A deck of playing cards that reshuffles reality slightly with every draw. The effects are subtle, but can change probabilities in your favor or against. Price, $23,477 SB. Echo Compass, discount 40%. A compass that points toward your most desired object or person, but may lead you into unexpected places. Price, $7,102 SB. Chameleon Cloak, discount 20%. A cloak that bends light, rendering the wearer nearly invisible, loses its effect if worn longer than 30 minutes continuously. One must also be careful, wear it for too long and the effect might be permanent. Price, $11,085. Available points, 8,322 SB. Shop. Almost immediately, my eyes fell on the glaring discount parts on several items. There's discounts. This shop offered discounts. I couldn't believe it as I immediately sorted through all of the items that were on offer. The number of items that were in the second order shop was less than the first order shop, but the quality was undeniable a lot better. The effects of the items were also a lot more desirable than the first order shop. The only regrettable point of the second order shop was the prices. They were simply ridiculous. Quite a lot of the items were priced in 6 to 5 digits. The items that were priced below were in the minority. As a result, the pool of items that I could choose from was also smaller. But that all changed with the discounts. With them, several of the items became affordable to me, and I already knew what I wanted. The compass, I need to buy the compass. There was no doubt in my mind that this item was going to be the item that was going to be the most useful for me. At the very least, it was also the only item that I could afford with the current SP that I had. This was why I didn't even hesitate when buying it. Perfect. As always, the item appeared right above me and fell right into my lap, and I grabbed it. The item was nothing special at a glance. It looked like nothing more than a simple compass that marked both south and north, but the moment I touched it, a cool sensation ran through my fingers, and I knew right away it was anything but ordinary. Good. I closed down the laptop and slipped it into my bag. At the same time, I checked my remaining balance and tried my best not to be hurt by the sight. 1,229 SB. I had spent about $70,000 on a compass. This thought alone made me gag. However, I also understood just how important it was for me, and so the regret and self-loathing merely lasted a few seconds before I settled my gaze towards the crack. All right. All preparations were made. I had the compass with me, the knife was in my bag, both Mile and the Dreamwalker were with me. Thankfully, the Dreamwalker didn't die, otherwise I really would have been in some trouble. I really needed to find more useful ways to use it. I couldn't just keep using it as some sort of meat shield. I'll figure something out later. Pushing those thoughts aside, I took a deep breath and stepped into the crack in front of me, falling into a mass of bodies that clung to me and pulled me deeper into them, slowly letting the darkness embrace me from all sides. Tsurak. I took a deep and desperate breath as my eyelids flew open, and the darkness clouding my vision began to fade. How's her? Holding onto my chest, I looked around me while sweat pooled down from the side of my face. Taking a few moments to catch my breath, I looked around me to see a crack appear not far from where I was, alongside the same view of the train as before. At first glance, everything looked the same as before I entered the crack. However, I was quick to notice the differences. The air around me. It was staler and warmer than the one I was used to. Not only that, but as I looked around, the train appeared much cleaner than it had been before I entered. From the chairs to the carpet, everything looked freshly tended to. It was as if someone had come here specifically to clean this train. Eventually, forcing myself up, I moved out the window. It was also then that I noticed the most glaring fact of it all. The windows. They were actually clean. There was no doubt I was in the right place. After a quick glance outside to make sure no one was around, I pulled out the compass and gripped it tightly in my hand. All right. I closed my eyes and thought deeply about what I wanted. Twisted Man clues. The moment the thoughts crossed my mind, a strange draining sensation hit me, as if something was pulling energy straight from my head. My knees nearly gave out, but I clenched my teeth and forced myself to endure it. Resist, just resist a little bit. Thankfully, the sensation didn't last for very long. It merely lasted a few dozen seconds before fading. Then, tia-ra-ra-ra-ra. A distinct stirring sound echoed through the quiet as I opened my eyes. The compass in my hand shifted and turned, its needle trembling slightly before finally settling. It pointed east. Back towards the city. East, that's where I need to go, I guess. Nodding slowly, I followed the direction of the compass. I really hoped this worked. The soft echo of my footsteps followed me like a shadow, each one louder than it should have been in the silence. The air felt heavier with every step I took, pressing in from all sides as I followed the compass. Pausing for a moment, I looked around me. I was once again back in the heart of the city. The only difference was the fact that there was no one present around me. The streets were completely deserted. Not a soul was in sight, and the cobblestone path lay empty beneath the tall metal lamps that flickered weakly. The faint, uneven light cast an unsettling shadow, filling the air with a strange sense of oppression. And this does feel creepy. The only thought that was in my mind at the moment was not to make a single sound. If this were truly like the Twisted Man scenario, then the last thing I needed to do was speak. I couldn't let it hear my voice. Still, looking at the compass, it does feel like I'm being led to a familiar road. As I looked around at the familiar streets and shops, a growing unease settled in. I was walking a path I had already traveled before. With every step I took following the compass, that feeling grew stronger until I entered a familiar narrow road, and my steps paused. If I wasn't sure of it before, I was almost certain of it now. I was being led towards the old woman's house again. Oh God! Looking at the road ahead and seeing the graffiti all over, alongside the cracks on the cobblestone path, I knew that the only notable thing ahead was the old woman's house. That was where the compass was leading me, and I pressed my lips tightly. Taking a silent breath, I clutched onto the compass while thinking about the description of the compass. There was indeed a small part that said it would lead me to somewhere unexpected. I had somewhat prepared myself for it, but who would have thought it would lead me all the way back to the old woman's house? Just recalling the place made my stomach churn. I really didn't want to go back to that trash-filled place. But when was the last time I actually followed my own cowardice? Even though I say I hate something and I don't want to go, I still go. I really just love doing this to myself. Shaking my head, I continued walking ahead before eventually spotting a familiar-looking apartment. The lights were off, and the place looked deserted. This made me feel a lot better. Right, this is a different world. Another place. The old lady shouldn't be here. Perhaps the compass is making me go back here because I missed something back then. It wasn't like I had actually done a very good job at investigating the place. Thinking about it, the only thing that I managed to get out of it was the photographs that depicted her two husbands in the same scenario, standing by the same train. Maybe there was more that I needed to discover. I moved cautiously toward the house, scanning my surroundings. Once I reached the door, I paused and placed my hand on the doorknob, feeling its cold, metallic surface against my skin. With just a turn of my wrist, a faint clicking sound echoed, and the door turned. Click. I remained rooted in place, looking down at my surroundings. Although the sound was small, it was loud enough to attract the attention of the Twisted Man. If the Twisted Man was truly here, I'd see some sort of hint about its presence. But nothing. Even as I flashed a light above me, there appeared to be nothing in my shadow. The twisted man was nowhere in sight. I sighed in relief the moment I noticed this, but I didn't let my guard down. The twisted man was a tricky anomaly. This could very well be within its plans if it were truly here. Opening the door slightly, I held my breath while waiting for the inevitable stench to hit my nostrils, but coming into the apartment, the sight that I had expected wasn't there. What was once an extremely filthy place, littered with trash and debris, now looked completely different. The floor was spotless, almost unnaturally clean, as if the mess had never been there to begin with. Although the wallpaper still peeled at the edges and carried a sickly yellow tint, the space felt far more maintained than before, throwing me off entirely. What the hell happened to this place? Why is it so well maintained? It almost felt like a completely different place. But that wasn't the only thing that gathered my attention. Staring in the distance, towards the now pristine living room where the TV was located, my eyes immediately fell on the gigantic circle that was deeply etched onto the floor. I suddenly had flashbacks of the time I was under the sofa and noticed the marking. Because of how many clothes and trash there were on the floor, I wasn't able to see the entire thing, but now that everything was clear, the marking became clear to me. It was a gigantic red circle, marked onto the floor with several symbols that I couldn't recognize. As I stared at it, a chill ran through me. Something about it felt deeply wrong, and an unsettling pressure began to creep over my skin. A sinister feeling crept up my skin the more I stared at the circle, and just as I was about to move, the TV flared to life. Flick. I half expected the familiar nursery rhyme to suddenly play out, but that wasn't what played out on the TV. Far from it. At first there was only static, then a video flickered to life, its image grainy and distorted, like an old VHS tape playing after years of dust and disuse. A low, vibrating hum bled into the air, growing louder, more invasive, like something alive gnawing at the edges of my mind. Shapes began to take form on the screen as figures, draped in white robes that covered their faces, encircled a red symbol scrawled into the ground. The markings pulsed faintly, and at the center stood a single person. It was a man. He wore the same suit, the same top hat. And as I slowly retrieved the first photograph and brought it forward, I knew exactly who the figure was. It was the first husband. Before I even had the time to properly process the situation, rhymes and hums began to echo from the TV as the magic circle beneath the man pulsed even more powerfully. I watched as the man started to panic. He tried to rush out of the circle, but was kept inside by the white-robed people. No, it almost feels like he's met some sort of wall. An invisible wall. He looked desperate as he tried to get out, but there was no use. He couldn't get out, no matter how much he banged on the wall, no matter how much he begged, he couldn't get out. And as this happened, his eyes were locked onto a specific white-robed figure. The entire time, he looked at that figure. And soon, he stopped. No, it wasn't that he stopped. It was as if something had taken complete control of his body, like a puppet whose strings had been yanked taut. Crack. Then, without warning, his head snapped backward with a sickening jolt, followed by his arm and the folds of his clothes twisting in unnatural directions. I watched the scene with wide eyes as the scenes continued for the next several minutes. And by the time it was over, it felt like the very air had been ripped from my lungs. I couldn't breathe. I could only stare, frozen, as my eyes clung to the flickering recording. There, looming in the center of the frame, stood a tall, familiar figure. Its limbs were unnaturally long, stretched beyond human proportions, and its face was hidden beneath the shadow of a tall, crooked top hat. It didn't move. It didn't need to. Despite appearing within the recording, its presence alone was suffocating, like the screen itself was bleeding dread into the room. Twisted Man. That was the Twisted Man. Thanks for watching. Please sub and like the video and comment down if anything wrong in the story.